We are very close to the end of February, but I had to share this interview with you this week because it was a fascinating conversation about so many things. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak with novelist and columnist Rhiannon Cosslett about her most recent release, Female Nude, which was released on the 12th of February. A study of the female form through the female gaze. It's a multi-dimensional novel about women, with the central character Sophie, an artist, contemplating the lives of other female artists and their accomplishments while considering her own life choices. A thoughtful and provoking piece of literature that had me considering the choices I made much earlier in my own life. I'm Ray, an unapologetic bookworm, introvert, self-confessed hermit and long-time depression sufferer. This is my quiet space to share thoughts as I make my way through an ever-growing to-be-read pile. Join me as I explore stories one book at a time with 100% honest and completely spoiler-free reviews. Welcome to Being Bookish, and please do enjoy your stay. And welcome back. I am here with Rhiannon Cosslett, and we are going to be talking about her brand new novel, which came out on the 12th of February, and that is Female Nude. It has a stunning greenish aqua water on the cover, and it's a very interesting read. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
The book is really interesting. I read it incredibly quickly because it's not a very, very chunky tome, but there is a lot in it. So for everybody who's listening, can you tell us a bit about the story?
Sure. So I'd say that first and foremost, as the title probably gives a clue, it's a novel about the female body. It's about the female body and how it's perceived, how we look, how we perceive being looked at. And this is told through the lens of the main character, who is an artist called Sophie. She's on holiday in Greece with some of her oldest university friends. One of them is getting married, and it's about their relationship, their friendship, and without wanting to give too much away, a love affair that she kind of embarks on during the course of this trip.
That was, for me, that was one of the interesting things. But the thing that struck me the most was every other chapter was Sophie's observations of a piece of female art of the female form in its many guises. And I ended up, when I was reading through this, I was sitting there, and I hate using my phone when I'm reading a book, but I needed to look up the pieces of art because a lot of them, in fact, most of them, I wasn't at all familiar with. And in most cases, I wasn't even familiar with the artist. I mean, obviously, we've got Frida Kahlo, and she's incredibly famous, and Tracy Emin, but there were a large number of artists that you chose to represent in the book that I had no idea about. And their sort of collection of work was incredible, and in some cases, really vast.
Yeah, I mean, I studied art history at university, so art has always been, even before then, was always a huge part of my life. And I knew that if my character was an artist, it would also be a huge part of her life as well. As far as I know, no one's ever actually written a kind of art historical survey of the female nude self-portrait. There are lots of books about the female nude as it's been painted by men or as it's been sculpted by men. But and there are books about women's self-portraits, but in terms of like women's nude self-portraits, which is what I was so interested in, I kind of had to go back and do my own research and piece together a sort of canon as I saw it. And that's what you said you did, was what I'm really hoping readers will do as they read. I hope that they'll look up these paintings, because there are some well-known artists, as you say, but there are also people like Anne Brigman, who was going up into the Californian desert in 1910, 1911, as early as that, and taking nude photographs of herself, which is just so pioneering and so groundbreaking, and hardly anyone's ever heard of her.
I think that was the thing. There was a lot of these female artists had such a tragic life. They were almost molded by the men that were around them, and that is somehow reflected in Sophie's experiences, especially when it comes to her observations of her friend Helena. And obviously Helena is the character getting married, and her relationship, and how she, I found it very interesting you used the term folded into herself like a deck chair.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I wanted to explore the various crossroads at which we stand when we are in our, I'd say, late 20s, early to mid 30s, and our lives start deviating in different ways. And obviously misogyny is a huge part of the story of these women artists. It's something that they battled against in their lives in order to be respected and understood, to carry on working. Some of them, unfortunately and very sadly, died. In fact, my editor was like, there's a very high body count in this
Yes,
novel.
there is.
Which isn't to say that it's a depressing book, but I think I also had to explore how misogyny kind of intersects with our own lives as well. And I think Helena's relationship is a particular way of doing that, because Helena is somebody who describes herself as a feminist. And if you've ever known anybody who's been in an emotionally abusive relationship, or if you've ever been in one yourself, I think you know that no matter how feminist you might feel yourself to be, it's very different when you're experiencing those dynamics playing out in your own life. And it can be very hard to kind of detach yourself from them. And it's hard for your friends as well to see you going through that. And I wanted to, it isn't the main strand of the narrative, but it was something that I definitely wanted to explore, how it feels to see somebody, a female friend that you know and love so much, be treated that way by the person who's supposed to love her most in the world.
It almost ran parallel with some of the stories of the female artists who were not necessarily physically, but emotionally and prospect wise beaten down by their male counterparts. And you have Helena, who seems like, I mean, she had the university education, she's got the opportunities, and she's with this guy that none of her friends like, but they know it's that whole situation, isn't it? Where I mean, everybody has been there at one point, where you've got this friend whose boyfriend or partner is not someone that you get along with, and you see something rather off about them, but you don't say anything because in your past, or someone has told you of a time where they mentioned something when they broke up and then they got back together, and there was this massive explosion of, I'm not talking to you anymore because you said this about the person I'm in love with.
Exactly. And she's kind of got wedding fever as well. She's just completely absorbed by this wedding that's coming up. And, you know, one of the kind of undercurrents that's permeating this holiday is that the other three are just bored to death of hearing about this wedding, but they love this woman, and so they kind of put up with it. But it's almost as though the wedding has become its own beast. It's sort of taken over from the actual, you know, Helena's understanding of her own relationship, I suppose. It's like it's too late for her.
And there's also this element of Sophie is feeling the pressure because she's got her boyfriend, her partner, Greg, is constantly trying to get her to agree to have a child. And then she's got these three, I'd say, two friends and an acquaintance, yes, rather than three friends, who are already judge her for who she is. And yeah, they think that she needs to fit in a certain box. You need to be, getting married, tick. Having a baby, tick. Getting a pseudo career as a home housewife, tick. And those are the boxes that she feels she doesn't, I mean, it's very, very clear throughout, those are the boxes she doesn't want ticked. And I think that comes across quite clearly with her. She is incredibly independent. She feels perhaps a little bit rebellious. And she's looking at her really good friend, Helena. She's seeing Alessia and she's seeing Iris and feels their judgment because of the choices that she's making.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, her life story is shaped by her experience of social inequality and class struggle, by her experience of disability in her family, and by her experience of care. And so she's coming at these questions from a very different place to some of her peers who haven't been carers, who haven't seen the economic impact that being a carer can have on a woman and on her career prospects in the same way that Sophie has. So Sophie's kind of living in a state of terror because she wants to paint, but she knows that the sacrifices that come with the kind of domesticity that she's being steered towards mean that she may not be able to achieve that ambition. And so she's kind of tugging against it. She's resisting.
Yeah, because we do have obviously we have the very emotional backstory with her sister, who she knows at some point in her life she will be responsible for because of an accident that occurred when she was much younger. And the fear of having responsibility for her sister as well as having responsibility for a child, knowing that her partner sees her. I mean, one of the references she says, he sees me as a potential incubator.
Yeah, and I
And
think
that's all she's seeing when she looks at her friend who's saying, oh well, we're going to start trying on the honeymoon.
And I think, yeah, and there's a lot, I think it's really important to note Sophie's internalized misogyny as well. You know, there are some uncomfortable things that she says about motherhood and about female subjugation and about how people view mothers that, you know, I felt uncomfortable writing. And there was a part of me that went, oh God, I hope people don't think that I feel this way necessarily. You know, I really wanted to write into that place of fear of motherhood, but also of, you know, truth when it comes to how mothers can be perceived by society. And that wasn't always a comfortable experience, but I felt like I had to do it.
I think it's very much a class thing when it comes to how mothers are perceived as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you'll have the upper class mothers who can afford. I was watching something on Instagram and this influencer said, oh, I've my 2 nannies. And you're thinking, yeah, what now? Because most, when you are, especially depending obviously on your class, it is the mother who brings up the children and the father who has that cursory, they will take responsibility, but they haven't quite got out of this, I'll babysit rather than I'll look after my children.
Yeah. And I think that it's important to say that, like, Greg isn't completely a bad guy. He's not.
No.
And that's partly why her friends don't really understand why she embarks on this love affair, is because he ostensibly is a very solid, very kind man, but he hasn't met Sophie where her doubts are. You know, there's one point in the book where she says, I want him to say, I will take the baby. I want him to say, I'll help you, you know, I'll facilitate your career. And he doesn't say those things to her. He doesn't give her the reassurance that perhaps would have set her on a different path.
Because she is, that's it, isn't it? It's that whole, we will share, it sounds awful saying share the burden, but it is, in that respect, that is what she wanted. And all the time when she confronts him and says, oh well, will you pay me because it's a job, it's almost as though it doesn't click with him that she's not wrong. It is a job. It is a 24-hour 7-day-a-week job. And you don't get paid for it. You are the little lady at home who makes the dinner, feeds the baby, makes sure the baby's healthy, happy, educated, and asleep, and then does all the housework. And I think that's the very traditional image of a marriage more than anything. Very, I'd say 1960s, but it hasn't in certain places progressed much further than that.
Yeah. And I think also, you know, she's aware of all these women artists and the sacrifices they made in order to raise children, and that's part of the kind of thread of the novel, is she's trying to work through, how do I do this? How do I paint and have a child? How have other people done it or not done it? What were their choices?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the research side of the book writing, really, was I had to go back and look at how these women artists lived, how they worked, and that was a really interesting kind of experience as well.
Yeah. The progression through the novel is you can see the way that the artists that she viewed, their lives had not necessarily improved, but they had changed and adapted their lives to fit around the things they wanted, rather than being forced to fit everything around what was expected of them. And as the novel grew on, you could see that these artists were not necessarily kowtowing to societal expectation, and that it seemed like that gave Sophie strength to make the decisions that she did.
Yeah, and I think that's something that resonates for me quite personally, is that I have always found inspiration and comfort in the work of other women writers, but also in the work of painters, of photographers, at different points in my life. So the way that Sophie engages with art is very much the way that I engage with art. It was a tricky balance to reach, and I think in my early drafts I was kind of showing my working a bit too much. I was becoming sort of, it was a bit overly academic, and I sort of, with the help of my editor, stripped a lot of that back, because in a way it was acting as a barrier to me really exploring the feelings that Sophie has. I was
Yeah.
kind of showing her intellectual side, but I wasn't really showing her emotional side. And I think that's the thing about when you're writing something that involves a lot of theory, you can have the theory underpin the narrative without it needing to be so explicit.
Yeah, you're not writing a brief history of time.
No, and I'm not writing a thesis, and I had to kind of come to grips with that, I think.
Yeah, I think that is the difficult balance. However, there is that balance, especially in her observations. You get her emotions and her contemplation every time she's looking at something. It's, I saw this, I remember when I saw this the first time, and this emotion was what grabbed me, which isn't academic writing. That is very much literature. And it came, I loved those pieces, and it really did make me, I love sculpture far more than I like, I mean, I've got pictures on my wall, but I would prefer a massive great big Rodin's kiss. Or, I mean, most of the sculptures I think of, they are mostly by men. And Bernini, though he was an absolute jerk, did a fantastic job with his sculpture of women. And those are the kind, I prefer something that's very, very tactile. And reading about these, it was fascinating to learn about something that I didn't learn in school, because I didn't take art, because I'm not artistically inclined at all. I can just about draw a stick figure. And I found it actually consumed a lot of time finding these artists, these images that you were talking about. And then I ended up down a not a bad rabbit hole, but a rabbit hole, as I did further research. Oh, well, what happened with that? And what was their connection to this? And where did this happen? And when was that? And oh, what was happening around that time? I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes and not come out of them for hours. But it was interesting, and I learned a lot.
Was there a favorite piece in the book, like one that you really loved?
I think my favorite one was the self-portrait female nude. And I don't know why. That's the one that stuck in my head the most.
By which artist, sorry? Or do you mean Sophie's one?
No, not Sophie's one. It was, I'm going to have to see if I can find it in the book.
I have put you on the spot, rather.
You did. I'm trying to remember where it was, but it was a really fascinating one, because it took me quite a while to find it. She'd done a few of them, this particular artist, and it was...
There's a list of works at the back, which
yes, it might have to be
copy. I've included that so that
yes, which will be really, really helpful. Which is really helpful. It was. I think it was the Suzanne Valadon,
Oh yes,
Self-Portrait with
love
Naked
this.
Breasts.
Yeah, her nudes are beautiful. I mean,
And her
her
story is tragic.
yeah, but she was amazing. I mean, what a woman.
Yes,
She posed
absolutely.
for everybody, and that's how she learned to paint, was by watching these male artists, Renoir included,
Yes.
painting and asking them questions and learning. And I think what's so beautiful about the way she paints her nudes is how naturalistic they are. You know, you really feel that the woman in front of you is a real woman, not a male fantasy.
Yeah, I think that's it. This was the woman through the female gaze rather than through the male gaze.
Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
think that's what this book is as a whole. It is her looking at herself and her own limitations and stretching them to their absolute end in order to accomplish what she could.
Mm.
I found the ending very sad, but I'm not going to go into that.
Yeah, a few people have told me they cried. I'm not going to go into any more than that, but
it has an ending that you kind of start seeing around 3/4 of the way through. There are hints at it in the paintings that she is looking at and the actual chapters about her and her decisions. But then it's at the end you were like, wow, okay, you're going there. And it was a sudden shift, but it maintained the same tone, because it was that whole, these are the decisions we've made and these are the choices, these are the paths we've gone down, and this is the final destination.
Hmm.
I also found her relationship with Kai interesting,
In
because
what way?
he seemed to see her for who she was.
Hmm.
But I wonder if that was also to do with one of the twists that I'm not going to go into that has given him more insight into who she is and what she wants.
It's really hard, isn't it? Because I wanted him to be beautiful, and Sophie finds him beautiful. I wanted to write about that experience. That again, I think is something that's not really explored much in fiction, which is not women objectifying men necessarily, although there's an element of that.
And that is brought up as a conversation, isn't it? That, oh, you're objectifying him. I thought you were against that.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to explore how it feels to be really attracted to a beautiful man, and how that kind of plays into her experience of female desire and her gaze as an artist. I didn't want it to be kind of just straightforward female objectification bad, male objectification okay. like but I was interested by that. I
It
wanted
was
to be almost like a mythic figure, in the sense that
Poseidon rising from the ocean.
sort of, I mean, you know, Greek myths, they're full of men disturbing women while they're bathing.
Yes.
And you know, Sophie first encounters Kai when he's swimming, so it's a sort of subversion of that. I wanted there to be a feeling of almost unreality, not that he's a Greek god or a mythological creature in any way, but
Yeah.
he is kind of a cipher for her desires as well.
But obviously there is something else going on. I do find it interesting that their relationship, as her confidence in her relationship with Greg is dropping, and she's realizing that everything he wants means to sacrifice everything she is and everything she needs for herself. Her relationship and her confidence in her sexuality and her own desires and needs is growing because of her relationship with Kai, but also the portrait she's painting of Alicia, who is incredibly confident. And
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting parallel to draw. Is Alicia is so confident in who she is as a woman, while Sophie is starting to gain confidence in who she is because of the fact that she's there and she's met Kai, and she's doing the things that she wants to do. She's found this freedom that she feels stifled in England with Greg.
Yeah, definitely. And Alessia, you know, it's important to acknowledge as well that Alessia is kind of stereotypically beautiful in that way, that she ticks all the boxes. She ticks all the patriarchal boxes. Not that that's without its own problems, but and I think Sophie kind of comes to understand that a bit more. But Sophie isn't somebody who I'd say suffers from extreme body confidence, let's say.
No, I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that she is surrounded by these people, especially Alessia, who is stunning. And then one of the scenes quite close to the beginning of the book where they're sitting around the pool and she observes Iris putting cream on her legs. And she says, I observed the gap between Iris's legs, as though not talking about anything other than that thigh gap that is so desired and is so worshipped. It's so unhealthy. And it seems to be the, as you said, the patriarchal norm and expectation of a woman's body.
Yeah, and I don't think you can write a novel of the female body, and particularly a novel that delves so deeply into female friendship dynamics, without acknowledging the way that body image shapes all of our adolescence and, you know, going into adulthood.
I grew up in the 80s. There was, I think it was one of the worst times to be short and overweight was in the 80s with Kate Moss, Naomi Campbell and Cindy Crawford. There's nothing like feeling inadequate.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of backdrop more in the 90s, but that 90s and early 2000s, but that's the backdrop that my characters have all come of age against as well. And, you know, as they discuss at one point, their own mothers have sort of played a role in that too. And I think, you know, that's a sort of uncomfortable truth that women might acknowledge between each other, but would perhaps never say to their own mothers. You know, I was lucky that my mum wasn't like that, but I know a lot of friends whose mums did kind of collude in that body fascism that has so damaged so many women.
Yeah, I think that is the generational I think there are multiple elements of generational trauma in this book. There's that requirement to have children and the expectation that you are going to produce grandchildren for your parents. And then there is body image. And that both of those are things that always have far more impact on women than they do on men. And that is something that this is a book for women who are feeling those things. And I mean, there is that, I think it came to fruition in the 80s and then built in exponentially following. You can have everything, but you can't. And that is the truth of the matter. And I think that this book covers that. It highlights there are certain things. If you want one thing, you do have to sacrifice other things in order to get it. You can't have everything and expect it to go 100% right. Because I was talking with a friend not that long ago, and she was referring to they've got children together and everything else. And she said, but if my husband left me, and it's like, why would you even think that? How many men sit there and go, well, if my wife left me, I'd have to look after the children. It would be if my wife left me, I'd have a house to myself.
Yeah.
And this broaches that in a really clever way.
Oh, thank you. I hope it resonates with women. I kind of hope men read it as well. I've had one male reader who left a very nice Goodreads review, and I was really pleased because I did worry about the title kind of excluding male readers, I suppose. But you know, when you set out to write a novel of the female body, I suppose that's a natural consequence. But I do hope there are male readers who think, oh, I'd quite like to understand what's going on a bit, you know.
I think it's an interesting perspective when it comes to the female body is a difficult thing, and we all, whether we grew up in an era where we were judged for how we look, we still have that internalized hatred or dislike of something You can look at the most perfect woman in the world and she'll say, oh, I've got a few dimples on my thigh, or, oh, I don't like this bit here, or I've got a mole. And we are our own worst critics. But when we hear it from others, it doesn't do anything to help, unfortunately. Even if somebody says, oh, but you're the most beautiful person, I absolutely adore you, there's still going to be that voice of doubt, because it's almost like it's part of our genetic makeup.
Well, I think it's socialized personally, but it digs deep, doesn't it? It's
Absolutely.
really, really hard to kind of fight against that. I didn't want it to be that she kind of loses this battle, though. You know, I wanted her to find a feeling of liberation and freedom in her body and in her sexual desire, and I think she does that.
Yeah, that definitely does come across, that she feels much lighter once, because even close to the beginning of the book, I'm going to have to break up with Greg, and that's before she gets involved with Kai.
Yeah.
So she knows that whatever happens, this relationship between them, even though it's been going on for 6 years, isn't going to have the result, isn't going to give her what she needs for herself. Whether that is whether she has a child or not, she doesn't want it to be with him.
No. And I wanted to explore that as well. You know, is it about whether or not you want to have a child, or is it about whether or not you want to have a child with a certain person? To what extent does your body choose the person that you have a child with? How much agency do you have in that decision? I kind of joked to my editor quite early on that I wanted to write the great ovulation novel, which is not something that I've put on the cover. But I think hormonal states and the role they play in our lives is seriously under-examined in literature. And it's something that I really wanted to write about. How does it feel to be ovulating to the point that you're like feral with desire for somebody?
That's an interesting question. I think that hormones are underplayed. We use menopause as a joke.
Yeah.
Or as an excuse. Oh, she was homicidal because she was menopausal.
I know, and I know that just by raising the word ovulation, it probably means that my work will get taken less seriously, because there's a sort of, oh, cringe, not hormones,
Woman stuff.
not women's stuff, you know. And I think in the writing of it, I've been very subtle. I'm not like, this woman's ovulating, you know. There were certain techniques that I wanted to use. I wanted kind of, you know, oh, sorry, I've just hit the table. I wanted her to, you know, the way she experiences food and smell and touch, and
she's vibrant.
Yeah, exactly. But it is a risk. It does feel like a kind of risk that it'll be viewed less intellectually seriously, I suppose, because of it. But I just felt like I had to write it. I think, you know, if you come at something from the perspective of, this isn't a story that's been told before, or not in this way, I just felt kind of, yeah, I felt like it was really important. And I think it comes at a time when women are becoming more and more aware of the role that their cycles play in their lives. You know, like we see loads of TikToks where people are talking about their luteal phase and all that kind of education around menopause and stuff. When I was a teenager, I didn't know what a luteal phase was. I didn't know what a luteal phase was until I started trying for a baby, really. So I think,
I was going to say, I don't think they taught us that at school. When I was at school, it was at the height of the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
So that is pretty much what all of our focus in health class was on.
Exactly. So I think it's, you know, the audience that will be reading this are a lot more clued up than I would have been if I'd read this in my early 20s.
Absolutely. And I think it's almost like, it's in a strange way a love letter to that particular phase in a woman's life. And there are certain hints all the way through, but it's not so blatant that anybody reading it from a different perspective would go, not reading any more of that, because it's not so blatant that
No.
it's going to hit them in the face.
And I think, that it's interesting that you talk about that phase of a woman's life, because that phase is also a relatively new thing when you look at history. And I think that comes across when you look at the stories of these women artists and how, childbearing and childbirth shapes their lives and in some cases their deaths.
Yeah.
That period that Sophie's living through, where she's just had a period sort of post-graduation of complete freedom. She hasn't got much economic freedom, and that plays into her relationship as well, because she knows that ending her relationship means poverty.
Yes.
As well. But that period of kind of not needing to care for anybody, that kind of 10-year period that she's lucky enough to have in her life.
And not everybody has it. So
not everybody does have it. And it's a privilege and it's a gift. And no wonder she's
reluctant
to give it up. Exactly.
I don't blame her for being reluctant. I mean, I'm saying this as someone who is child free, and I say child free because I chose that lifestyle rather than childless because I wanted children. And I have got a lot of friends who have had children. My sister's got 4 and had her last one 8 years after the third. So she's got a teenager, and the rest of her children are in their 20s, and one of them's about to become a father themselves. So they are at very, very different stages. And obviously she's gone through different stages and cycles in her own life. And in a few years, she will, after having had children at home for 28 years, will finally have that stage that a lot of people have in their 20s.
Yeah. And, I know people from growing up, a bit like Sophie, who have children very young. And often they do have that freedom later on in their, if they have children very young in their 40s, they'll then have a period of kind of freedom. So it's all about how class kind of plays into that dynamic as well. Sophie, in a way, is kind of struggling with the expectations of her class as well as with the expectations of the middle class, which is that, she's kind of escaped her hometown, whereas in the past she would have stayed and had a baby.
Absolutely. She went to get further education, to experience life. But I wonder if part of that, and the fact that her parents almost encouraged it, is because they knew that her life would be tied to her sister's later down the line.
Yeah. And I love her parents, because they're not necessarily art connoisseurs, but they
support her.
It's not a natural choice for her, coming from her social background, that she would go into this unstable creative industry that she wants to, but they support her and they're proud of her and they are loving and they don't limit her. And that was really important to me.
Yeah. And she does acknowledge that they will be disappointed when they find out her decision regarding Greg.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that's more because of the financial support he provides her.
I think so. I mean, every parent wants their child to not be in an economically precarious situation, shall we say?
Yeah.
Particularly if they've experienced that themselves. It's actually a huge thing for Sophie to kind of turn her back on that.
Yeah, especially when her entire friend group it feels like it's almost dependent on that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, as someone who grew up reading Austen novels,
same here,
you sort of, the marriage market of the Austen novel is not something you'd expect to necessarily be alive and well in 2026, albeit in a different guise. And yet these decisions that she's making shape her future, not quite as fundamentally as those of an Austen heroine, but, she is essentially, in turning her back on Greg, she's asking, is that my only chance to become a homeowner?
Yeah.
What stability and what economic freedom am I sacrificing in order to be with somebody that I love, as opposed to someone that I am fond of.
Yes, it's sort of that Crazy Rich Asians thing.
Yeah, although I haven't read that, so I don't.
Well, she's from a lower socioeconomic background, and the guy she's involved with, she doesn't realize at the time, is incredibly wealthy and one of the wealthiest families in Hong Kong, I believe Hong Kong. Correct me if I'm wrong. And everybody in his socioeconomic group is incredibly judgmental of her to the point that she leaves.
Mm.
But obviously there is a twist and everything turns out right. But it is very, in that particular environment, it is all to do with you don't fit in our group, which is Iris is the one who makes her feel like she doesn't belong. And she's not exactly backward in it.
And I think anybody who's moved in certain circles or had experience of industries where elitism and nepotism are rife will have met an Iris.
Oh yeah. I think everybody at this point in their lives will be able to sit down and say, I've met an Iris.
Yeah.
Whether they were somebody who purposely made you feel uncomfortable because you weren't up to their expectations because you aren't of their class or you don't fit in. And I think everybody's met one, whether they've met them at the nightclub or they've met them in the workplace.
Yeah. And Iris is fundamentally quite an insecure person because she hasn't got to where she's got to through her own merit. And on some level, she knows this and it manifests as unpleasantness.
Spite.
Yeah.
100% spite. So were you inspired? I mean, obviously you've got the art history background, but were you inspired by any conversations you'd had with friends? Did you have a friend group like this one, or did you have a lucky escape?
I have a group of very close friends from university who I'm still in touch with and still care about hugely, who are very thankfully nothing like the women in this novel. I think where I drew on those friendships was from the experience of loyalty. That experience of kind of loyalty no matter what, no matter how badly behaved somebody is, you know, if somebody is being unfaithful to their partner, not that my friends have been, but just to use an example, there's a kind of loyalty that comes above the bad behavior, I suppose. And I was interested in examining that. Iris is kind of not based on any one character, but I've met so many nepotists in my life that I did have fun writing her, and it did make me wonder what it would be like to be closer friends with somebody like that, I suppose, or to have somebody like that
in your circle,
more in your social circle. Exactly. So that was sort of my starting point. And I felt like I'd experienced enough nepotism in my life to write that character in a way that was convincing, I hope.
Yeah, I think it's one of the terms I'm always seeing headline, Nepo baby this, Nepo baby that. And you look at it and you're reading the article and it's Nepo baby of such and such works in an office. And it's like, they're not a Nepo baby. They haven't taken advantage of their father or their mother to get their job. They're working in an office.
Yeah.
So it's that, I think there's that comprehension of Nepo baby. And in Iris's case, she really is. She achieved what she did because of who her parents were and their influence.
Yeah. And there'll definitely be a few people who I've met who might go, if they read the book, oh, is that me? But it isn't.
It's not you.
No, for legal reasons, it's not you. But no, obviously what you do when you write fiction is you take what you know to be psychologically true and you transpose it onto fictional characters.
Absolutely. I think obviously there are people that go, well, they can pick themselves out of a lineup in a book and know that that is 100% them without a shadow of a doubt. But at the same time, that is partially because it's been published somewhere and someone's actually said, oh, that was inspired by this person I went to school with.
Yeah. No, I'm lucky. My friends aren't nepotists. They're lovely. But, and I mean, Alessia is kind of a nepotist too, right?
Yeah,
So
well, she's staying in her parents' house. She's clearly not got many responsibilities, if any at all, and lives quite a carefree life.
yeah, she eventually becomes a gallerist, and her father's a gallerist. So, I felt like the world was ready for a kind of um, taking to task of the nepotist, I suppose, without saying what actually happens. And I mean, I think it's important to say that Sophie's decisions aren't always.
The best ones.
She doesn't always behave brilliantly, does she?
No. But at the same time, I think that is humanity in general. You can make a few decisions that aren't the best. You can take a wrong path. And as long as you acknowledge that what you've done wasn't necessarily the kindest thing, you aren't somebody who's just gone and committed some heinous crime.
No. I mean,
And
sometimes when people ask me what the book's about, I say it's about how, being around rich people makes you insane. Because I think there's a kind of class struggle in Sophie that eventually explodes, shall we say.
yes.
And that class struggle is something that I think can live in your body. I think your experience of poverty can live in your body and manifest as fury.
And she is, to be fair, driven to the brink.
Yes.
She is, she is driven to the brink. At that moment, I think most people would flip, and she does. And I kept on expecting it to happen. I was waiting for it to. And when it did, I can honestly say I wasn't surprised. And I was kind of happy she did it.
Yeah, well, that's the challenge of writing a character who's kind of not amoral, but not always likable, shall we say. I didn't want her to be a thoroughly dislikable character.
Yeah.
But I did want her to make decisions where readers might possibly go, "Oh my God," And I'm really excited to see what people make of it when they finally read the book and what they make of Sophie. Because it sounds like you were rooting for her.
I was. I
was rooting for her too.
I think that in some ways I saw myself in her from the whole perspective of I didn't grow up in an affluent background. I mean, I've got stuff now, but I fought for that. I paid for my own university education. I grew up in a single parent household because my dad died when I was really young. And I have a younger brother and sister, and we all had that struggle. It wasn't an easy decision to make when we did things. It wasn't a case of, oh, we've got everything and it's going to be really easy. It wasn't. And I think that I identified with that in Sophie. I could see that same struggled upbringing.
Yeah.
So I didn't look at it and think, oh, that's really easy, because I know it's not. Coming at it from the perspective of I went to a state school. I've got relatives that are incredibly wealthy who had everything and threw it all away, and you just think, oh my God, it's so disappointing. But I think that was why I was rooting for her more than anything. But yeah, I think if we talk about this anymore, we're going to give away the massive twist, and I don't want to. So where can people find you online?
So I'm on Instagram at Rhiannon Lucy Cosslett. That's the place that you can find me the easiest. I also write a Guardian column every week, so I'm on the Guardian website if you're interested in reading some more about me. I'd say those. I've gone off Twitter. It became too toxic for me, so
that's why I'm not on Threads.
No. I do miss it. I miss book Twitter. It used to be lovely.
Oh, Twitter is getting better again now.
Oh, is it?
Yes, it is. It's getting better. I didn't give up on it, and I still look at it regularly. I don't participate as much as I did, but it is getting better.
Well, that's nice to hear. It's not that the book Twitter went bad. It's that a lot of people left because of all the,
yes,
Elon
exactly.
Musk fascism. So it's good to know that it's thriving again.
It is still thriving, yes. Yeah. So I will post those links below, and Female Nude comes out on the 12th of February. So by the time this episode is out, you will be able to purchase your copy from wherever you buy your books. And thank you so much for coming on and chatting about this book. It's been really interesting and it gave me a lot to think about when I was reading it.
Thank you so much for reading so thoughtfully. It really means a lot to me.
I like to get the best out of a book when I read it, even if I'm sitting there thinking, I need to look this up now. Well, that's it for this week. And thank you again to Rhiannon and Lucy Cosslett for taking time out to talk to me about female nude. Please do go and get a copy for yourself now. And thank you to everyone for listening. If you're enjoying the show, why not share it with your friends or family and leave a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can find me on Instagram at Being Bookish Pod, on X at Being_Bookish, and on TikTok at Being Bookish Reviews. If you prefer reading, you can head to my website, beingbookish.co.uk, for spoiler-free reviews, my 2026 reading tracker, and all the links to the podcast in one place. Until next time, this is me saying farewell.